Hey guys, tonight we're slipping behind the thick wooden gates of a medieval convent just as the sky begins to bleed from ink black into the first pale grey of dawn. You're bundled under a coarse wool blanket, half dreaming of warm bread or maybe even a fire, when suddenly a bell clangs through the stone corridors like a divine alarm clock wielded by someone with no concept of snooze. You jolt upright on a straw-stuffed mattress, your bare feet meeting the unforgiving cold of the flagstone floor. It's time for matins, ready or not. And no, you probably won't survive this, especially not on 4 hours of broken sleep, no coffee, and a diet that involves watered wine as a luxury. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop that in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bell tolls again, and you wrap your habit tight around you, the brown wool heavy and scratchy against your arms. Outside your narrow cell, the other sisters are already filing into the stone corridor, their sandals slapping softly as they go. No one speaks, it's too early, and besides, silence is the rule until the hour of terce, unless you happen to stub your toe on the stairs, in which case the Lord will have to excuse a whispered curse in Old French. You join the procession and pass through the archway leading to the chapel, the air somehow colder in here than it was outside. The stone walls drink up warmth like a miser clutches coins, and the scent is a mix of beeswax, old wood, and whatever Sister Agnes cooked for supper 2 days ago. Your breath mists as you kneel on the wooden stool, joints creaking more than the floorboards. A flicker of torchlight dances along the nave, casting your shadow against a cracked painting of Saint Scholastica. You begin to chant the first psalm of Matins. It's in Latin, naturally, medieval Latin to be precise, so even the Romans would squint a little at the grammar. Historians still argue whether nuns of this era actually understood all the words they recited, or if the phrases simply became sacred background noise, like a heavenly white noise machine that got louder during Lent. The chanting is slow, melodic, and if we're honest, slightly off-key in places. Sister Gertrude always drags the Amen, and Sister Joan has been sharp on Dominus for a decade now. But no one dares correct her. She once gave a goose last rites after mistaking it for a possessed child. She means well. As the service stretches on, you find your mind drifting. The stone under your knees is numbingly cold, and you wiggle your toes inside your sandals to stave off the pins and needles. You think about the woodpile out back. You think about how many days are left until St. Bridget's feast, because that usually means better butter. You think about how your cousin Ellen is probably still asleep in a feather bed somewhere, unbothered by matins or freezing choirs. A soft snore breaks your reverie. Sister Agnes, bless her, has nodded off again during the third responsory. You gently nudge her elbow with yours. She wakes with a little jolt, muttering what might be Ave Maria, or possibly I'm awake, I'm awake. There's something deeply calming about this pre-dawn ritual, even in its discomforts. It's repetitive, familiar. In a world that can change with a single cough from a bishop or a lost harvest, there's reassurance in knowing the psalms never alter. The bell rings, the words echo, the shadows stay the same, at least in the chapel. And there's beauty in the sound too. As much as you'd like to be asleep, the echo of the choir against high vaulted ceilings creates a soft holy cocoon of sound. It's like praying inside a cathedral made of whispers. After nearly an hour, the chanting ends. You rise stiffly, bow toward the altar, and shuffle back into the corridor with the rest of the sisters. Outside, dawn has officially arrived, though the sun still hides behind a veil of winter clouds. There's a faint scent of wood smoke drifting from the kitchen. You might even get warm bread today if Sister Edgith didn't burn it again like last week. You return to your cell briefly to retrieve your plain wooden bowl and your worn linen napkin. Then it's off to the refectory for breakfast, your reward for surviving matins without toppling over or accidentally chanting a bit of the wrong liturgy again. But before food, always the hands. You wash them in icy water that's been sitting in a pewter basin since the previous night, and you wonder for the 10th time this month if frostbite is part of your penance. Probably. Medieval theology has never shied away from the suffer now, heaven later lifestyle. You sit, you wait, you do not speak. The next bell tolls, and breakfast begins. You are seated at a long wooden table in the refectory, surrounded by your sisters, all arranged in neat, silent rows like weary chess pieces. The air smells faintly of wax, damp stone, and something that might once have been barley porridge, though it's hard to be sure. A single candle flickers at the head of the room, illuminating the prioress as she begins to read aloud from a worn, leather-bound text. It's usually a saint's life or a sermon, never anything scandalous like poetry or romance, unless it's by St. Bernard and veiled in metaphor. You glance down at your breakfast, a slice of coarse rye bread soaked in watered ale, soft enough to eat with your few remaining teeth, but bland enough to make you nostalgic for yesterday's carrot. Occasionally you're allowed a bit of cheese or dried apple, but not today. Today is a lesser fast, which mostly means it's cold, and your stomach already sounds like a distant thunderstorm, but you eat, slowly, quietly, one bite at a time, trying not to chew too loudly. The nun across from you, Sister Maud, chews with the deliberation of a cow in contemplation. You once timed her chewing pace using the bell chimes. It took her 4 Ave Marias to get through a plum. No one speaks, not out loud. This is the great silence, and though there are exceptions made later in the day, morning is not one of them. Still, conversations unfold in eyebrow movements, subtle glances, and the occasional gasp if someone finds a weevil in their bread. That happened once during Easter week. Sister Cecily screamed. The prioress claimed it was a test of humility. Historians still argue whether these rigid silences were enforced for discipline, divine focus, or simply to avoid dealing with Sister Agnes's opinions on turnip farming. Some abbeys were stricter than others. In certain orders, even coughing had to be done discreetly, ideally outside. As the prioress drones on about St. Margaret and her battle with a dragon, which you're pretty sure was a metaphor, but Sister Bertha swears was literal, you begin to count the cracks in the stone wall beside you. 13, 14, 15. One of them looks a bit like a fox. Eventually the reading ends and the candle is snuffed out with a practiced flick. You rise with the others, hands folded neatly, bowl empty, mind a little fuller. Next up, chores. You shuffle through the cloister, pulling your veil tighter against the wind that creeps through the open arcade. The sky is still grey but lighter now, and birds call faintly from the apple trees near the garden wall. You know what comes next? Cleaning. Always cleaning. because in the eyes of the medieval church, cleanliness is close to godliness, at least when it comes to the chapel floors and guest latrines. You retrieve your tools from the corner of the storeroom, a stiff, bristled brush made from boar hair, a wooden bucket half filled with cold water, and a rag that has definitely seen better centuries. You begin with the cloister floor, scrubbing the flagstones in slow, circular motions, mindful not to get your hem wet again. It took forever to dry last time, and damp wool smells exactly like regret. Scrubbing is its own sort of meditation. You fall into rhythm, dip, scrub, ring, dip, scrub, ring. You hum under your breath a fragment of a hymn you're not supposed to know from memory, but do anyway, something cheerful, something not in Latin. Sister Elfrida passes by, balancing 2 buckets of water with alarming grace. You envy her wrists. They've never once cramped during Vespers. By the time you finish your section of the floor, your knees ache and your hands are red and raw. You consider whether God truly intended for penitence to smell like lye and mildew. Still, there's a certain pride in seeing the stone gleam faintly beneath your brush, even if no one notices. The chapel may be cold and damp, but it is clean, and that matters in a world where nothing else is certain. You head to the cloister garden next, where the early winter frost still clings to the edges of the herb beds. You pluck a few stray leaves from the gravel path, more out of habit than necessity. The lavender is brittle now, but its scent lingers in the air, soft and floral. You pause beside the bench, just long enough to feel the stillness settle over your shoulders. And that's when the bell rings again. Not for meals, not for prayer, but for chapter meeting. Which means it's time to confess yesterday's sins. You groan internally. Did you really have to count the cracks in the wall during scripture reading? Probably. Did you imagine Sister Maud as a chewing cow again? Most definitely. And what about the hymn? Humming Gauda Maria during floor duty was borderline heretical, depending on who's listening. As you walk back toward the meeting hall, you run through your mental list of misdeeds. Minor ones, of course. You've never snuck a chicken into the dormitory or stolen candles like Sister Lettice did last Lent. But still, your thoughts aren't always as pure as the rulebook demands. And really, whose are? You file into the chapter room with the other sisters, shuffling across the creaking floorboards like guilty penguins headed for judgment. The prioress sits at the head of the semicircle, perched on a chair that creaks ominously every time she shifts. Her expression is neutral, but not forgiving. She holds the convent's rulebook in one hand like a medieval traffic cop with a scroll instead of a whistle. Each nun takes a turn, rising, bowing, and confessing her missteps from the previous day. Most are predictable. Sister Ethel admits to dozing off during matins again. Sister Joan confesses to breaking silence by mumbling in her sleep, something about St. Cuthbert and jam tarts. You try not to giggle. It's frowned upon. When your turn comes, you rise, fold your hands neatly, and clear your throat. You admit to distracted thoughts during the morning reading, and after a pause, mention the forbidden hymn, humming. The prioress nods slowly, scribbles something on her wax tablet, and assigns you a penance of 2 extra psalms and assisting in floor-scrubbing duties tomorrow. You bow again and sit, knees popping audibly as you do. Historians still debate how seriously these confessions were taken. Some suggest they were more about building humility and conformity than true moral reckoning. Others argue that nuns wielded confessions like subtle daggers, using them to air grievances with a pious grin. You've seen both. Sister Euphemia once accidentally mentioned that Sister Bertha left the latrine door ajar. Sister Bertha hasn't spoken to her since. When the meeting ends, you return to the refectory for a short reading, this time about the martyrdom of some unfortunate named Basil, who was apparently flayed for refusing to renounce his faith. You try not to imagine the logistics of that, and instead focus on the crumbs still lingering in your wooden bowl. Then it's time for the scriptorium. You settle onto a wooden bench that may or may not be older than your entire family tree. The desk before you is slanted for writing, and a tiny inkwell sits nestled into a carved groove. You select a quill, a goose feather with the nib shaved to a clean angle, and dip it carefully into the ink. The parchment smells faintly of animal hide, which, to be fair, is exactly what it is. Your task is to copy passages from the Book of Psalms. Again, you suspect this may be the 5th time you've done Psalm 119, but it's hard to tell. The Latin dances in your mind, half-remembered phrases stitched together with muscle memory. Beati Immaculati in Via, and so on. The ink glistens as you write, drying slowly in the chill air. Every letter must be perfect. A single blot can ruin an entire sheet, and considering the cost of vellum, that's a sin in itself. Sister Benedicta, who oversees the scriptorium, once slapped a girl's wrist for sneezing mid-sentence. You pull your sleeves back and hunch over the desk, careful not to smudge. Your fingers cramp after 20 minutes. After 30, you start talking to the parchment in your head. Come on, just one more Dominus without a wobble. You can do this. Outside, snow begins to fall, light and drifting, barely visible through the narrow, stained glass windows. The room grows colder still. A few sisters have pulled their veils lower over their ears. You consider lighting the nearby candle, but the prioress has warned that too many candles in daylight is a waste. God gave us sunlight, she said once, while ignoring the obvious fact that it's currently hidden behind 3 layers of winter gloom. You shift slightly and stretch your hand, trying not to crack your knuckles. The last time you did that during transcription, Sister Edith looked at you like you'd just slapped St. Jerome himself. Time inches forward. Eventually you finish your allotted passage, close the ink pot with a sigh, and flex your aching hand. You blow lightly across the last line to ensure it dries clean. You have created something sacred, even if, to your modern ears, it still reads like a particularly poetic shopping list. You carry the completed page to the shelf with reverence. Some of these will be bound into books eventually. Others may simply be stored away, forgotten in a chest until a future monk finds them and wonders why the D's all look slightly panicked. The bell rings again, thankfully. It's time to spin wool. You file into the workroom where baskets of fleece await like fluffy clouds with attitude. The smell of lanolin lingers in the air, waxy, sheepish, earthy. You sit cross-legged with your spindle and begin the gentle rhythm of twisting fibers into thread. It's meditative, this spinning. Your fingers move almost without thought. Pull, twist, wind. Pull, twist, wind. You glance at the others. Glance. Sister Edith is mumbling prayers with each spin. Sister Agnes, you're sure, is whispering gossip. This is one of the few times in the day when soft speech is allowed, provided it's spiritual, technically, but every nun has mastered the art of cloaking ordinary conversation in religious overtones. Did you hear what Sister Theophania said in confession? Her humility is inspiring. Translation: she's totally in trouble again. Such a heavy snowfall last night, a true metaphor for the soul in Lent. Translation: my feet are frozen and I'm annoyed about it. Brother Hugh from the Abbey was here again to deliver apples. Translation: Brother Hugh is cute. You smirk. The nun life may be quiet, but it's never dull. The wool in your lap grows steadily heavier as your spindle fills with yarn. Your fingers are stiff but practiced, spinning the fleece into coarse thread destined for habits, linens, and perhaps, if the Abbey gets a generous donation, some altar cloth trim with modest embroidery. You rub a sore spot on your thumb, wondering how many blisters until sainthood becomes automatic. You're not the fastest spinner. That title goes to Sister Clarice, who spins like she's on a divine deadline, but your thread is strong and even, and the prioress once nodded approvingly at a skein you finished last winter. You still think about that. Nuns live on crumbs, after all. Sometimes literal, sometimes metaphorical. As the work continues, the room buzzes with soft, murmured voices. You catch snippets of conversation couched in enough piety to pass inspection. Someone mentions the bishop's recent sermon. Another discusses Sister Joan's candle wax accident with the candlesticks, which mysteriously now lean sideways in the chapel like penitent sinners. Historians still argue whether these communal work periods were deliberately structured to encourage discreet bonding, or whether they were simply a practical necessity. In either case, they are often where the real relationships of the convent blossom, carefully, quietly, and always under a veil of reverence. Outside the frosted windows, the sun struggles to break through a quilt of low-hanging clouds. Your fingers are starting to go numb, so you tuck your spindle into your work basket and stretch your legs. You've earned it. A short break is permitted before the next bell. You step into the cloister walk, the covered arcade that wraps around the central courtyard like a stone hug. This is one of the most sacred places in the monastery, not for any formal reason, but because it is where you're finally allowed to speak freely, at least for 1 hour. Your voice is a little raspy at first, it always is. A full morning of silence does that. You murmur a greeting to Sister Elfrida, who is pacing slowly, her rosary sliding through her fingers like water. You don't ask if she's reciting real prayers or just counting beads to look busy. That's convent etiquette, plausible holiness. You pause near a bench beside the herb garden. Someone has left a wool shawl here, forgotten during morning chores. You pick it up and fold it neatly, placing it back on the stone seat. The chill of the stone seeps into your fingers, and you wonder, not for the first time, why every surface in a convent must be either frozen, splintered, or both. A few other sisters gather nearby. The conversation turns to the weather. Then to Brother Stephen's latest sermon about humility. Then, inevitably, to the latest visitor at the gates. Apparently, a noble woman has come seeking shelter for the night, a widow with a sharp tongue and a purse full of dried cherries. The prioress will decide if she stays. Most likely, yes. Nobles come with influence, and influence, whether anyone admits it or not, makes monastery life a little more comfortable. You recall last month's visitor, a wandering poet monk who recited Latin verses under his breath and tripped over the cat bowl in the cloister. Sister Benedicta still refers to him as Brother Clatter. Your hour of talk is brief but precious. You fill it with laughter, quiet of course, shared memories of saints' days past. and a particularly scandalous story about a former abbess who, legend claims, once fenced off half the orchard for a private garden of strawberries. No one knows if it's true, but everyone loves retelling it. Eventually, the bell tolls again, clear, firm, unamused. You return to silence. It's time for receiving visitors. You and 3 others are assigned to the guest hall today. That means greeting pilgrims, nobles, and the occasional wayward friar who wandered in looking for a hot meal and possibly a new pair of shoes. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and prepare your holy welcome face, a blend of serene patience and just enough smile to seem inviting without straying into flirtation, which naturally is forbidden. The guest hall is modest, stone walls, a hearth, which is rarely lit, and a few sturdy wooden benches. You bow as a young merchant enters, boots caked in snow, carrying a small chest of preserved apples for the kitchen. He mutters a blessing, offers a bow so shallow it might be mistaken for a cramp, and retreats before his breath has even had time to fog the air. Next comes the widow. She's wrapped in layers of velvet and fur, her fingers sparkling with rings despite the vow of mourning. Her eyes sweep the room with well-practiced judgment. You guide her to a seat, offer watered wine, and accept her bundle of gifts with a grateful nod. She's brought cherries, just as promised, and a bundle of embroidered handkerchiefs. Sister Clarice will quietly compete to get one by nightfall. The widow asks about the library. You explain with practiced courtesy that women guests are not usually permitted entry, but you can bring her a volume or 2 if the prioress agrees. She chooses a book of saints. You suspect she'll fall asleep halfway through St. Ethelbert's journey to Kent, but you admire the effort. Historians note that medieval nunneries often doubled as social hubs for upper-class women, places of spiritual retreat, temporary shelter, or semi-retirement from court politics. Visitors were common, and a well-run guest hall was a badge of honor for any abbey. After a few more guests, most less glamorous than the widow, you return the empty cups to the kitchen. Sister Euphemia is stirring something suspiciously thin in a pot that smells faintly of onion, thyme, and existential dread. You give her a knowing glance. She just shrugs. It's nearly time for noon prayers, but before that, a quick visit to the infirmary. You take a slow breath before pushing open the thick wooden door to the infirmary. The air inside is a touch warmer, thanks to the brazier in the corner, barely glowing with embers, but still tinged with the scent of vinegar, rosemary, and something pungently herbal, possibly sage, possibly despair. It's hard to tell anymore. The infirmary is quieter than the chapel, and somehow more sacred. There's no chanting, no reading, no scolding here, only hushed footsteps and the gentle rustle of linen. You move toward the nearest cot, where an elderly woman lies with her eyes closed and her hands tucked under a heavy wool blanket. She's not a nun. She's a noble widow who fell ill while traveling to a distant shrine. Now she lies here, halfway between this world and the next, breathing slowly and evenly like the ticking of a forgotten clock. You place a warm cloth on her forehead and murmur a prayer, soft, automatic, and without expecting a response. You're not sure if she hears you, but the rhythm of the words, the cadence of devotion, seems to settle something in the air. That's half the work here, healing the atmosphere. You check the small shelf nearby, thin broth, slightly congealed, a pot of barley water, a wooden bowl filled with dried rose petals, and something green and crumpled that might once have been mint. You spoon a little broth into her mouth, tilting her chin just enough to help her swallow. Historians still argue whether medieval monastic infirmaries were genuinely effective or simply elaborate waiting rooms for death with a side of leeches. You've seen both sides. You once helped a sister recover from fever using only garlic oil and prayer. You've also watched a pilgrim succumb to a cough in under 3 days. At the far end of the room, Sister Letitia is wrapping a wounded hand. One of the kitchen helpers sliced her palm open on a fish spine. Again, Letitia works quickly, binding the wound with honey-soaked linen strips while humming a lullaby from her childhood. She's good at this. Probably should have been a surgeon if that were allowed. You assist with preparing another infusion, boiling water with dried marigold, betony and powdered ant eggs. Yes, ant eggs. It's for headaches, supposedly. Or lovesickness, maybe both. Recipes blur together after a while. You think back to yesterday when you helped make salve from beeswax, goose grease and crushed rosemary. The smell still lingers in your sleeves. It was for chilblains, or possibly just because the prioress thinks goose grease is holy. Who's to argue? Outside the infirmary window, snow continues to fall, soft and relentless. You wipe down a shelf, fold a clean towel and whisper a short verse over the sleeping noblewoman, even though she probably won't remember it. You'll remember. And sometimes, in the silence, that's enough. The bell rings for sext prayers. You leave the infirmary with the same slow steps you entered, passing through the cloister again, where the snow has now blanketed the garden paths. Everything is hushed and white. You imagine walking barefoot through the snow as penance. You're half convinced the prioress has considered it for someone. Back in the chapel, the sisters gather for the midday office. You kneel again, folding your body into the rhythm of devotion. The psalms echo softly, mingling with the faint whistle of wind sneaking through the cracks in the old windows. The words wash over you like a tide, lulling and repetitive, like being rocked in a cradle built from Latin and stone. Your stomach grumbles. Again, you ignore it. Fasting is part of the rhythm too. After the prayers, there's a brief meal. Warm broth today, thin but flavorful, probably thanks to the noblewoman's contribution of herbs. You sip slowly, savoring the rare hint of garlic. There's even a slice of rye bread with a smear of something suspiciously like honey. A gift from the widow, a miracle, a mislabeled jar. Either way, you eat it with joy. Afterward, there's a short rest period. You return to your cell, stretch out on your straw mattress, and listen to the wind whistle under the eaves. You're not expected to sleep, just to lie still. It's a luxury, and one not to be wasted. You close your eyes. The convent fades for a moment, and when you open them again, the bell rings once more. You rise with a groan, pull your veil back over your head, and step into your sandals. The day is only half over. Outside, the wind howls with new determination. Now it's time to prepare herbs. You walk slowly toward the herbarium, located in a corner of the cloister garden under a low, mossy archway. Inside, the smell hits you like a botanical orchestra. Peppermint, marjoram, thyme, dried lavender, wormwood, and something that smells like old socks but is allegedly good for toothache. You take a small mortar and pestle from the shelf and begin to grind a handful of dried comfrey root. It smells earthy and bitter, and it sticks to everything. You're supposed to add it to a poultice later for Sister Agnes, who has developed a swelling in her knee from too much kneeling and not enough complaining. Nearby, Sister Avis is carefully measuring out dried foxglove petals for a tincture meant to help with heart palpitations. You're not allowed to touch it. Too dangerous. She wears a woolen cloth over her mouth just in case. You silently thank God you were only assigned to the mint leaves and juniper berries. Herbs are serious business here. One wrong mixture and you might be sending someone to heaven faster than intended, but used correctly they can soothe sore joints, calm fevers, and even lift the spirits of an overworked nun who hasn't laughed since Candlemas. And so you grind, you mix, you arrange. Until the bell rings once again. The bell calls you from the herbarium back through the cloister walk and into the chapel once more. But this time, your hands carry a faint perfume of sage and crushed fennel, and your sleeves are dusted with lavender crumbs. You sit down in the choir stall, ignoring the twinge in your back from grinding comfrey root for half an hour straight, and begin chanting the psalms of Nun, ninth-hour prayers that float into the air like gentle echoes stitched into stone. You're starting to feel the day now. Your legs are heavy, your eyelids droop with each Gloria Patri. Even the painted saints in the stained glass seem to blink slower. But there's no room for naps, not yet. After the service, you and the others file out into the cloister again, and the work continues. This time, it's back to the wool, but not for spinning. Now comes weaving. You enter the weaving room, where long looms stretch like skeletal ships across the narrow space, and the air is thick with the soft creak of wood and the steady thump of threads being tightened into place. You approach your loom, where a half-finished strip of plain cloth waits patiently. You check the warp threads for tension. Everything is in order. The repetition begins. Lift, pass, beat. Lift, pass, beat. Over and over, like the tick of an ancient clock that runs on linen and prayer. Some of the older sisters are true masters at this. Sister Elodia weaves tapestries that would impress a duke, while Sister Blanche once accidentally created a pattern that looked vaguely like a bear and swears it was a vision of St. Corbinian. Historians still argue whether convent weaving was merely economic necessity or a form of silent art. But for you, it's meditative. The rhythm steadies your thoughts. You fall into the soft cadence of the shuttle, the occasional creak of the frame, and the distant murmurs of birdsong sneaking in through a cracked window. You daydream a little too. Nothing scandalous, just simple, sleepy thoughts. What if you had been a baker's daughter instead, waking to knead warm dough instead of cold piety? What if you'd married that boy with the curly hair who used to pass your father's farm with his goat cart? But the loom doesn't allow wandering minds for long. One loose thread and the whole cloth could unravel. You sigh, realign your weft, and refocus. After about an hour, the bell rings again, blessedly. You rise, stretch your arms, and feel the small muscles in your shoulders protest. There's a dull ache in your lower back, a badge of holy service if there ever was one. You step back into the open air, the cold wind bracing and welcome after the warmth of the weaving room. The sun has dipped lower in the sky now, casting golden light across the snow-dusted courtyard. Shadows stretch long beneath the arches of the cloister. And somewhere in the distance, the kitchen bell chimes for pre-supper prep. You head toward the kitchen, one of the busiest and most unpredictable places in the convent. Today, you've been assigned to help Sister Winifred with vegetable chopping, which is either a peaceful task or a chaotic test of patience, depending on what she's decided to boil. The kitchen is steamy and loud in its own quiet way. Pots bubble, spoons clatter, and a few geese outside the open hatch honk in protest about something none of you will ever understand. You take a turnip in one hand, a small blade in the other, and begin chopping, steady, careful, avoiding the bruised spots and daydreams of accident. Sister Winifred mutters to herself as she stirs a massive pot of what might be lentils or yesterday's barley. Needs time, she says to no one in particular, and gestures at a shelf you can barely reach. You fetch the herb and sprinkle some into the pot, unsure if you've overdone it. She tastes it, makes a face, and adds more salt. Close enough, she mutters. The convent kitchen runs on rhythm and memory. Recipes are rarely written. You learn by watching, by repeating, by guessing. Some days you burn the porridge and pray no one notices. Other days, like today, you manage a stew that smells almost inviting. You set the table in the refectory, wooden bowls, spoons, slices of hard bread stacked like dominoes on a plate. The candle at the reading desk is lit again, ready for the evening's scripture. You sneak a cherry from the kitchen basket, a leftover from the widow's gift, and chew it slowly. Sweet, tart, little miracle in your day. And then the bell rings for vespers. Again, you return to the chapel. This will be your 5th formal service today, and there are still 2 more after that. You kneel, you chant. The psalms now flow through you without resistance. It's like floating in a warm stream made of words. Outside, the sun is sinking fast. The sky blazes briefly with pink and gold before fading to lavender and ash. The torchlight flickers on the chapel walls, casting the carved faces of saints into gentle motion. You swear St. Cecilia just winked, but maybe that's the candle smoke. After vespers, you head back to the kitchen to help serve the evening meal, lentil stew, as predicted, a hunk of brown bread, a slice of cheese for the elders. No dessert today, but there is peace, and that's enough. The prioress reads softly from a hagiography, some forgotten martyr whose fingers were allegedly turned to gold after his death. Sister Agnes tries not to snort. You succeed in not laughing, but just barely. As you eat, the warmth from the stew seeps into your bones. You feel the weariness in your arms, your hands, even behind your eyes. It's the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from a day full of labor, rhythm, prayer, and a few stolen cherries. The silence is almost comforting now, and the candle burns lower with every breath. You wipe your bowl clean with the last scrap of bread and set it carefully aside. The candle on the lectern gutters slightly as Sister Winifred finishes reading the final passage for the evening. It's a short story about St. Dymphna curing a man by whispering psalms into his ear during a thunderstorm. You're not sure how historically plausible that is, but the idea of someone whispering psalms into your ear while you're tucked in bed sounds rather comforting. After supper, there's a quiet pause. Not officially a free time, it's never called that, but the space between vespers and compline is the closest thing you get to leisure. You take full advantage, slipping into the cloister walk with a thick shawl wrapped around your shoulders. The sky above is indigo now, scattered with stars that peek between the clouds. You take a slow breath. The air is crisp and clean, tinged with pine from the nearby woods. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hoots, sounding mildly offended by the chill. You walk slowly around the courtyard, your sandals whispering against the stone. This is the hour when the convent feels most otherworldly. The buildings glow faintly in the moonlight, their outlines softened by drifting mist. Shadows fall like velvet across the garden paths. You pause at the statue of the Virgin Mary, nestled between two yew trees. Someone's left a small bouquet of dried lavender at her feet. You add a sprig of rosemary from your sleeve and bow your head, not out of obligation, but out of something gentler. Habit. Hope. Maybe both. This is when the younger sisters sneak off to whisper real secrets behind the dovecote or near the storeroom. Not wicked secrets, of course, just the kind that require a little moonlight. Sister Cecily's latest dream. Sister Avis's strange feeling about next month's feast day. A blurry memory of what it felt like to run barefoot through mud before they took vows. You sit on a bench in the cloister, letting your muscles soften against the cold. For a moment, you allow your thoughts to drift, to family, to childhood, to the sound of rain on thatched roofs and the smell of baked apples cooling on a windowsill. But not for long. The bell tolls again. Compline. You rise slowly and join the others as they gather for the final prayer of the day. The chapel is darker now, lit only by 2 torches and a single candle on the altar. You file into your place and kneel. Your knees creak audibly this time, and no one judges you for it. The prioress leads the first verse, her voice low and steady, like water trickling over stone. You follow. Your voice is soft, not from weariness, but because it fits the hour. The words fall like petals. In manus tuas, Domine, commendo spiritum meum. Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. There's something final about Compline, not frightening, not even sad, just restful. You chant as though sealing the day, shut with a gentle sigh. The candle flickers. The incense curls into a lazy ribbon overhead. You close your eyes between verses, not sleeping, just floating. Historians still discuss the psychological impact of Compline on monastic life, whether it truly calmed the soul or simply marked the end of an endless cycle of labor and prayer. But you felt it. That hush. That closing of the day's ledger. It matters. When the final prayer ends, you stand. No bows this time. Just soft footsteps as you make your way down the corridor to the dormitory. The room is long, narrow, and dim. Rows of narrow beds line either side, simple wooden frames, straw-stuffed mattresses, 1 coarse wool blanket each. Your own bed is near the center, beneath a small, round window, where the moon sometimes peers in, like a nosy neighbor. You change into your night robe, folding your veil carefully beside your bed. You kneel briefly on the cold floor. One last prayer, one last whisper of gratitude, one last word that only God hears. Then you lie down. The straw creaks beneath you. The blanket smells faintly of herbs and dust, and the sun-warmed stones from when it was last aired. You tuck your hands beneath your chin and sigh. And just when you begin to drift, you hear it. The bell. Again. Midnight vigil. You groan into your blanket, but it's a quiet groan. You're not alone in it. Every sister around you stirs, shifting, rising, fumbling in the dark for sandals and shawls. You light no torches. Only the moon and memory guide you now. You pad silently through the hall, returning to the chapel one last time. Midnight vigils aren't every night, but tonight is one of them. A holy day, or perhaps penance for the previous week's unusual warmth. The reasons blur. You kneel once more. The cold bites more sharply now, and your joints protest more than they did this morning. But the chapel is quieter than ever, and the chants echo softer, like lullabies hummed by ancient stones. The psalms this time are slower, deeper. You don't even try to follow the Latin consciously. You let the sound wash over you like gentle waves lapping at the edges of a dream. Your voice blends into the others, becoming part of the long, slow breath of the convent itself. And in that silence between syllables, you feel it. Peace. You glance at the flickering candle, now nearly spent, and wonder, not for the first time, how many centuries of prayers have echoed through these very walls. How many sleepless nights were filled with this same sacred murmur. How many women before you knelt on these same flagstones, whispering the same ancient words. The answer doesn't come, but somehow you know it's enough. You wake again, but this time to no bell. There's a moment, just a sliver, where you forget where you are. You feel the weight of the blanket, the faint scent of lavender in the straw mattress beneath you, and for a heartbeat, you think you're in your childhood bed, back in your family's cottage. Then the distant creak of wooden sandals in the hallway brings you back to the convent, to your cell, to the cloistered life that wraps around you like ivy on stone. You stretch gently beneath the covers. It's still dark, though a thin ribbon of pink glows faintly at the edge of the sky. Dawn again. You don't rise immediately. This is the one part of the day not dictated by the bell. No matins, no chores, just this. A liminal moment between vigil and waking day, where even the prioress is likely asleep, or at least pretending to be. He's pretending to. Eventually, you rise. You move quietly through the dormitory, careful not to wake Sister Joan, who occasionally speaks Latin in her sleep, or Sister Maud, who snores like a dying bagpipe. You wash your face in the cold basin near the cloister entrance, shivering as the water drips from your chin. No mirror here. Nuns are not encouraged to dwell on appearances. Not that you'd want to, anyway, given the purple shadows under your eyes and the persistent impression of linen wrinkles on your cheek. You make your way through the cloister, stepping lightly over patches of fresh snow that blew in under the arches overnight. The courtyard is empty, still silvered with frost, but the birds are already awake, chirping from their perches in the yew trees like tiny, judgmental angels. Today, you've been assigned to help with visiting pilgrims. You sigh, but softly. The convent, though cloistered, still acts as a shelter for travellers, especially those journeying on foot to distant shrines. You don your wool cloak and meet the others at the gatehouse. There's a cart parked outside, pulled by a donkey that looks roughly 600 years old. A woman is helping her child down from the seat, and a tall man is lifting a small wooden chest, likely full of candles or dried fruit meant as an offering. You bow, offer a murmured welcome, and open the gate. Pilgrims are, by nature, a varied bunch. Some are devout and silent, eyes full of reverence. Others are talkative, prone to exaggerating their injuries or declaring visions of saints in their porridge. You've learned to nod sagely at all of them. You help them settle into the guest hall, straw bedding, a clay pot of warm water, and bread dipped in broth. You fetch extra blankets from the storeroom and show the child where to find the chapel entrance. She looks up at you, wide-eyed and muddy, then asks if you're the boss nun. You smile and shake your head. Definitely not. That would be the prioress, and you wouldn't wish that burden on anyone. After tending to the guests, you return to the cloister and make your way to the small corner room known simply as the library, though it contains fewer books than a modern airport kiosk. Still, it's your favourite place. The room smells like parchment and beeswax, and the window lets in a slant of light just bright enough to read by. You're not scheduled for reading hour, But Sister Benedicta allows you to borrow a thin volume of saints' sayings, a copy handwritten by someone with marginalia so small it requires squinting and prayer. You tuck the book into your sleeve and head for the warming room. It's rare to find this space empty, but today it's blessedly so. You sit on the bench near the small brazier and open the book. For a moment, the world fades into rustling pages and the comforting rhythm of translated Latin proverbs. You smile at a particularly odd one. The camel kneels before the needle, but never surrenders the thread. You have no idea what it means, but it sounds impressive. Historians still puzzle over the literacy levels of medieval nuns, whether they were truly scholars or just copyists. But here now, you feel the gentle pride of comprehension. You can read, you can think. And for a woman in your century, that alone is a quiet kind of rebellion. Eventually, Sister Elodia joins you in the warming room, her hands full of tangled embroidery thread. She sighs dramatically and drops onto the bench beside you. Still trying to recreate the nativity scene, you whisper. Still failing, she whispers back. Joseph looks like a turnip. You laugh, but gently, warmly. Sister Elodia is one of the few who can joke without malice, and her presence is always a comfort. You help her untangle the green thread, and she mutters something about how baby Jesus will just have to deal with one leg shorter than the other. You nod solemnly. Artistic interpretation, you offer. As the warming room fills with quiet conversation and the soft hiss of coal settling in the brazier, you feel the day shifting. Soon there will be another bell, more work, another service. But for now, you allow yourself this small, stolen hour. A pause, a breath, a thread of peace stitched gently into the fabric of your day. The next bell startles the room into motion, not harsh, just insistent, like an old friend tapping on your shoulder. You close the book, gently brushing a thumb across the faded cover, and help Sister Elodia gather her tangled embroidery into a neat bundle before heading out. It's time to help tend the infirm again, specifically to sit with the noble woman who's still recovering in the back corner of the infirmary. You're not sure whether she's actually ill anymore or just enjoying the excuse to lie under thick blankets and be spoon-fed broth like some sort of ecclesiastical queen. Either way, you're expected to attend to her as if she were St. Helena reborn. When you enter, she's already awake. Her grey eyes track you as you cross the room, and she offers the faintest of nods, an aristocratic motion that somehow communicates both gratitude and deep disapproval. You offer her a spoonful of warm lentil broth, and she accepts it like it's a gift from the Archangel Gabriel himself. Too much garlic, she murmurs. You try not to smile. To distract her, you open a volume of Saints' Tales and begin to read aloud, your voice soft, steady, the syllables laced with the same cadence you use in prayer. The story is about a virgin martyr who tamed a wild lion with her singing. Whether it's inspiring or absurd depends entirely on your mood. Today, it feels cozy, familiar, the kind of story you could tuck into a blanket with. As you read, the noblewoman's eyes drift closed. You pause, watching her chest rise and fall with slow, measured breaths. She looks peaceful now, no longer the proud figure wrapped in fur at the convent gate. Just a tired woman in a cold room, dozing to the sound of a story. Historians still debate the role of noble guests in convent life, whether they elevated the status of the monastery or simply drained its resources. From where you're sitting, she's just another soul, one among many, wrapped in linens and mystery. You close the book quietly and make your way to the side table to fetch a clean cloth. But something catches your eye, a small letter tucked halfway under her pillow. The parchment is folded precisely, sealed with wax. You pretend not to see it. You're a nun, not a spy. But of course, curiosity lingers like incense. You leave her resting and step into the corridor, where Sister Agnes is tending to a pot of rosemary steeping in warm water. It's meant to be rubbed on Sister Maud's joints later. You help stir, grateful for the distraction. Your next task is to prepare a tonic for a visiting friar who arrived with a persistent cough and a flair for drama. He insists it's divine punishment for over-preaching. Sister Euphemia thinks it's just bad wine from the last village. You grind dried licorice root and fennel together, adding a dash of honey and a spoonful of warm water. The result tastes like herbal mud but smells strangely pleasant. You wrap it in linen and set it aside for delivery. The work is quiet, repetitive, and somehow grounding. This is what much of nunhood truly is, not epic revelations or radiant visions, but the small, unseen work of care. Carrying water, grinding herbs, folding linens, whispering prayers over bowls of soup. You step outside for a breath of cold air. The wind has picked up, and snowflakes spiral through the cloister garden like feathered confetti. You pause by the apple tree, bare now, its twisted branches etched against the sky like black lace. A small sparrow hops near your feet, pecking at something invisible. It looks up. Curious, you bow to it. You're not sure why. Back inside, it's time to receive more visitors. You make your way to the guest entrance again, brushing snow from your sleeves. This time it's a small group. 2 pilgrims from the coast and a young novice from another abbey seeking transfer. The pilgrims are tired, their cloaks stiff with salt and damp wool. You offer them warm broth and dry linens. The novice, meanwhile, clutches a letter and looks like she's barely out of childhood. Her eyes are wide and rimmed red, but she doesn't cry. You lead her to the side parlour where the prioress will speak with her. As she walks beside you, she whispers, "Is it true we only get cheese on Sundays?" You glance sideways. "Sometimes," you reply. She swallows hard. Later, you help show her to the temporary dormitory. You lay out fresh sheets, adjust the window shutter so the wind doesn't howl, and tuck a sprig of lavender under her pillow without telling her. Just a small kindness. You remember what your first night felt like, too. Back in the main convent, the day is beginning to fade. The sky outside the chapel windows has turned a quiet grey, the kind that signals either snow or sleep, or both. The evening service approaches, and with it another chance to kneel, chant, and let go. But first, a quick visit to the animal shed. You slip out through the rear gate and make your way to the low, wooden building tucked against the monastery wall. Inside, the convent's small flock of chickens murmurs softly in their roosts, and one elderly goat, Margaret of course, chews hay with the same deliberate pace you use during morning prayers. You refill the water trough, scatter a few handfuls of grain, and scratch Margaret gently between the ears. She blinks at you with sleepy eyes, a good goat, if not a particularly devout one. The smell in here is earthy, strong, but oddly reassuring. There's something deeply satisfying about the rhythm of simple care. You sweep the straw into a fresh pile, pat a sleepy hen, and hum a few bars of a chant that somehow turns into a lullaby. By the time you return to the convent, your boots are dusted with straw, your hands smell faintly of goat, and your heart feels a little lighter than it did an hour ago. The bell rings. One more service, one more step. And then slowly toward the quiet of evening again. The bell chimes low and long for vespers, the golden sound rolling through the stone halls like warm honey. You brush straw from your sleeves, wipe your hands on your apron, and join the others, streaming quietly into the chapel. The light inside is different now, softer, amber-tinted from the last rays of sun slipping through stained glass. The faces of the saints glow gently on the walls as if they're leaning in to listen. You kneel again. Your knees no longer complain. They've surrendered. The psalms begin, familiar and slow, echoing through the chamber like waves against a monastery's stone shore. You don't think about the words now, you feel them. You're no longer reciting, you're floating. By now, your voice blends with the others so completely that it's hard to tell who is singing what. You're all one long, murmuring note. And in that quiet cohesion, there's something beautiful. A small, unspoken vow renewed with every breath. Tonight's passage tells of oil poured on the head of the faithful, running down like a blessing. You imagine that. Warm oil, dripping slowly, soaking into your hair, your bones, your thoughts. Not practical, but deeply human. Historians still argue whether the emotional lives of nuns were constrained by rigid discipline or quietly enriched by spiritual companionship and ritual. You think it depends on the day. Some days feel like prayer, others like paperwork in Latin. But this moment, is something gentler. This is devotion without friction. When the final Amen fades into stillness, you rise. Supper is over for the day, and now comes one of the most curious parts of monastic life. Holy days exceptions. Today isn't a major feast, but it's the vigil of one, St. Wulfhilda's Day. And that means there's a treat. Not sweets, not wine, but music. Sister Blanche plays the rebec, a bowed string instrument shaped like a teardrop and twice as finicky. She sits near the cloister fountain while the sisters gather, some leaning against the stone columns, others perched on benches or low garden walls. She draws the bow gently, coaxing a tune from the strings that sounds both ancient and impossibly new. A melody stitched from candlelight and snow. You sit cross-legged on the cold flagstone and close your eyes. The music fills the cloister, skipping softly across puddles and stone. No one speaks. Even Sister Joan doesn't hum along. She just listens, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of her habit. A few of the younger nuns sway slightly with the music. You remember being like that, looser in the limbs, less burdened by the weight of routine. You watch them, not with envy, but with something quieter. Affection, maybe. Or memory. When the last note fades into the evening air, Sister Blanche smiles faintly, bows her head, and places the rebec carefully back into its cloth bag. Applause isn't permitted, but the silence that follows feels deeply appreciative. You all drift apart after that. Some head to the kitchen to help wash the bowls from earlier. Others tidy the cloister walk or feed the fire in the warming room. You, lucky as ever, are on candle duty. You retrieve a small brass box of beeswax tapers and begin replacing the stubs in wall sconces and altars. Your fingers are nimble, practiced. You enjoy this work, it's quiet, repetitive, and, in its own small way, holy. Each flame you light flickers to life like a tiny prayer whispered into the darkness. And there's a strange power in that, isn't there? Lighting something instead of extinguishing, bringing warmth instead of taking it away. As you pass the library, you pause. The door is ajar. Inside, you see Sister Benedicta seated at the writing desk, carefully copying a line from a manuscript. She doesn't look up, but she gestures. You step in quietly. She hands you a small piece of parchment. It's a psalm written in fine hand, with a floral border inked in red and gold. For the widow, she murmurs. She asked for something to take with her. You nod. It's beautiful. She thinks it's a charm, Benedicta says, not unkindly. Let her think it. She needs something sacred in her pocket. You take the parchment, carefully wrap it in cloth, and tuck it into your sleeve. The widow leaves at dawn. You leave the library and return to your cell for a moment of stillness before compline. You sit on your bed, parchment in hand, and look out the window. The sky is streaked with stars now, the kind of stars you only see in silence. The moon hangs low, full and luminous like a watchful eye carved into the sky. You remember the pilgrim child earlier, how she asked if you were the boss nun. You laughed at the time, but now, sitting here, you wonder what it might mean to be a leader in this life, to bear witness, to serve, to carry other people's pain like a folded piece of parchment in your sleeve. You lean back against your pillow and close your eyes. The bell rings once more. Compline calls. You rise. The rhythm continues. You walk the now familiar path to the chapel, guided more by habit than by sight. The air is crisp, almost hollow, as if the world itself is holding its breath. You pass the cloister garden, where snow has settled in quiet piles on the stone benches and herbs, blanketing even the stubborn rosemary in a thin coat of shimmering stillness. The only sound is the soft shush of your sandals brushing against stone. Inside the chapel, the candles are already lit. Their flames flicker against the walls, making the saints in the stained glass windows seem as though they are moving, just slightly, like they're breathing with you. You kneel. Again. At this point, your knees feel more familiar with the cold flagstone than your hands do with the pages of scripture. But you don't mind. This ritual has become a kind of lullaby, a slow, rhythmic descent into rest. The prioress begins the service with a deep, deliberate breath. Her voice floats out, low and soft, reciting the opening lines of Compline. Converte nos, Deus salutaris noster. Turn us again, O God, our Saviour. And so the final prayers of the day begin. You join your voice with the others, a soft drone that ebbs and flows like the tide under moonlight. You're tired now, not exhausted, but worn like a well-read page. It feels right. You imagine your voice curling up through the rafters, joining all the prayers that have ever been said in this room. Whispers stacked upon whispers, building a cathedral of sound invisible to the eye. There's a moment in the middle of a psalm where your voice almost falters, not from fatigue, but from something stranger. You suddenly remember your mother's voice, just a snippet, a single word said gently while brushing your hair on a cold morning. It passes through your thoughts like smoke, and then it's gone, absorbed into the next verse. You don't cry, but your throat tightens for just a moment. In pace in idipsum dormiam, et requiescam. In peace, I will lie down and sleep. The candle on the altar gutters slightly. One of the sisters coughs. The air in the chapel smells like old stone, wax, and wool. You breathe in deeply, letting the final prayer settle deep into your bones like warm tea. When the Amen comes, it's a whisper rather than a proclamation. You rise gently and follow the line of sisters out into the corridor. The footsteps are soft. Everyone moves slower now, like they're wading through holy syrup. But the day isn't quite done, not for you. You've been asked to assist Sister Theodrada with checking the storeroom, an inventory of candles, herbs, linens, and other sacred odds and ends that seem to multiply when no one's looking. You don't mind. The storeroom is one of the quieter corners of the abbey. It smells of beeswax, dried thyme, and old wood. You like it here. Together you and Sister Theodrada take count. 3 bundles of wool cloth, 7 beeswax tapers, a tin of nutmeg almost empty, a bundle of rosemary tied with red thread, 1 small figurine of Saint Apollonia, the patron of dentists, mildly disturbing in her own way, but you keep her just the same. Sister Theodrada is quiet but kind. She hums under her breath as she works, a simple tune you don't recognize, but feel you've always known. When she finishes listing the last item, she gently sets down her quill, stretches her fingers, and says, "Tomorrow will be long?" You nod. St. Wulfhilda's feast day always is. The prioress insists on 3 extra readings, a special blessing, and a dessert that involves raisins soaked in weak ale. You're not sure if that's a treat or a threat. Before heading to bed, you take one last turn through the cloister walk. It's empty now, except for a single candle burning low beside the Virgin statue. You stop. Just briefly. You pull the small wrapped psalm from your sleeve, the one for the widow. She leaves before sunrise. You place it on the edge of the bench near the guest hall door, knowing she'll see it when she departs. You don't leave a note. You don't need to. Outside, the stars are still watching. One of them seems to wink. You return to your cell for the last time tonight. Inside, the blanket is cold. The mattress is unforgiving. The wind howls softly under the shutter. But you feel calm, steady, folded into the quiet like a page in a well-loved book. You close your eyes. And for once, the bell doesn't ring. You wake before the bell, just barely. There's a hush in the air, a kind of fragile silence that feels borrowed, like even the dawn isn't sure whether it should arrive yet. You lie still under your blanket for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no wind. Just the faint crackle of frost shifting on the roof tiles above. Today is St. Wulfhilda's feast, and though that means more prayers than usual, it also means little surprises. A thimble of warmed wine at supper, sweetened porridge, and best of all, permission to smile. Not that you usually need permission, but it's comforting when it's given. You rise, dress quickly, and join the others in the hallway. Everyone moves with slightly more energy this morning. Even Sister Maud, who once claimed her joints were older than sin, seems to creak less today. The chapel is brighter than usual. Someone lit extra candles, probably Sister Euphemia, who always overdoes it on feast days. The flames flicker eagerly, reflecting in the polished brass of the altar cross. You kneel in your usual spot, folding your hands with a mixture of reverence and deeply suppressed yawns. The prioress begins the liturgy, her voice softer than usual, almost melodic. She seems pleased. It's the one time a year she lets herself use the gold-threaded bookmark in her breviary. A celebration in silk and stitching. You chant, and this time the words come easily. The psalms feel warmer somehow, like someone added a pinch of cinnamon to the Latin. It helps that the chapel smells faintly of cloves and wax, a feast day tradition that goes back decades. You breathe deeply between verses, letting the scent and sound blend into a kind of holy fog. After the service, there's a rare treat. Conversation allowed at breakfast. You sit at the long table in the refectory, a bowl of sweetened barley in front of you, real honey no less. The warm grains steam gently as you stir, and your mouth waters just a little. Sister Blanche is already talking about St. Wulfhilda, how she refused to marry a Saxon noble, tamed a wild boar with her prayers, and built 3 convents with nothing but a spade and a pocket full of relics. Sister Agnes interrupts to point out that the boar story is likely metaphorical. Sister Blanche counters that all saints have weird animal stories. You choose slowly, watching the debate unfold like a theological snowball fight. Historians still debate the life of St. Wulfhilda, whether she truly performed miracles, or whether her legacy was shaped more by politics than piety. But to you it hardly matters. Her feast means warmth, laughter, and, most importantly, cheese. Yes, actual cheese. You receive a small triangle of it alongside your bread, crumbly and sharp. It tastes like heaven, or at least like something just a few steps below purgatory, which is basically heaven, with fewer indulgences. After breakfast, the sisters gather in the garden for the traditional recitation of Wulfhilda's rule, 10 short sayings meant to guide a holy life. You stand in a half circle around the yew trees, your breath puffing clouds into the cold air. The sayings are strange, as always. Tend thy soul as thou would a stubborn sheep. Spare not the vinegar when cleansing the heart. Speak little, listen often, yawn never in chapel. That last one always gets a giggle. Once the recitations are done, you return indoors for mid-morning duties. Today, instead of chores, the prioress has declared it a day of spiritual reading and holy reflection, which is code for you may sit somewhere warm with a book, and no one will assign you to clean chamber pots. You claim your usual bench in the warming room and unwrap a thin volume from the library. Vitae Sororum, a collection of nun biographies written in enthusiastic, occasionally questionable Latin. You skim one story about a sister who reportedly floated 6 inches above the floor during evening prayer. You suspect that was poetic license or an overactive scribe. Sister Clarice joins you on the bench, working on her embroidery again. Today, she's trying to stitch St. Wulfhilda's face onto a kneeling cloth. You glance at the current attempt. It looks more like a mildly concerned pigeon wearing a wimple. You're improving, you whisper kindly. She sighs. Her nose keeps migrating. You keep reading. She keeps stitching. An hour passes in peaceful quiet. Then the bell rings for the feast day procession. You line up in the cloister, each nun carrying a candle or a relic, well, alleged relic. Yours is a chipped bone in a velvet pouch labelled Thumb of Saint Apollonia. The question mark is part of the tradition, You process slowly around the garden, chanting verses between each corner, the snow crunching softly beneath your sandals. The sunlight dances on your candle flame, and you do your best not to drip wax on your habit. Again, after the final prayer, the prioress blesses you all with rosewater from a silver sprig. It smells sweet and a little sad. You wonder how old the bottle is. You return to the refectory for a midday meal, roasted root vegetables, sweet oat cakes, and, miracle of miracles, a sip of mulled wine. Not enough to get tipsy, but enough to warm your cheeks and loosen your thoughts. The rest of the afternoon passes in a comfortable blur of light chores and quiet celebration. You help fold altar linens, arrange holy cards, and carve tiny faces into candles for an upcoming baptism. Sister Avis starts one that ends up looking like the prioress. You both pretend not to notice. By the time the sun begins to sink behind the chapel roof, you're pleasantly tired, slightly wine-blushed, and filled with the kind of warmth that only comes from days built around rhythm, reverence, and good cheese. You sit in the garden one last time before compline, watching the stars flicker to life one by one. The sky glows a soft violet. The snow glitters. And the silence settles around you like a blanket stitched from prayer. The hush before compline on a feast day is different, heavier, like velvet soaked in candlelight. You feel it in the way the sisters walk more slowly down the corridor, in how the bells chime a fraction more softly, in the gentle rustle of woolen habits brushing against cold stone. You make your way to the chapel again for what must be the 7th time today, but this time something is different. There's an extra shimmer to the torchlight. The incense is already burning, a sweet, thick mixture of frankincense and dried juniper, and it coils through the air like a sleepy dragon, curling around the wooden beams of the ceiling. You take your place, kneel again, and feel the familiar ache in your knees return. Not painful, just present. Like a reminder of your humanity wrapped in a vow. The chant begins. Tonight's compline feels slower, as if the entire room is gently rocking itself to sleep with each verse. You sing along, your voice low and steady, your body falling into the rhythm. The words slip from your mouth without thought. Te lucis ante terminum, to thee before the close of day. The Latin glows in your mouth like warm honey, and for a moment you forget the cold, the tiredness, the long hours of sweeping and herb grinding and bowl washing. It's all melted into this stillness, this softness. You bow your head at the closing prayer and feel the silence settle over your shoulders like a cloak. Afterwards, as the sisters rise, you stay behind for a moment. You're not alone in this. Sister Edith often lingers too, sometimes to pray, sometimes just to think. She sits quietly in the last row, fingers wrapped around a rosary, worn smooth from decades of use. You walk out slowly and return to your cell, passing under the arch of the cloister, where shadows pool like ink. But tonight is not for sleep just yet. You've been assigned a special penance. You didn't do anything terrible, just forgot to attend the chapter reading 2 days ago. You were in the infirmary with the widow, reading her stories and helping her sit upright. The prioress, while understanding, still believes that penance keeps the soul's edges sharp. And so you kneel again, not in the chapel this time, but in the cloister's eastern corner, where the statue of Saint Benedict watches over the garden gate. You spread a handful of dried barley on the ground and kneel atop it, as instructed. It's not as bad as it sounds at first. The grains poke into your knees, sharp little reminders of discipline. You murmur your penance softly, 3 psalms and a prayer for humility. You've done this before, everyone has. Sometimes for dozing off in choir, sometimes for failing to scrub the pots to the prioress's liking. Once, Sister Maud had to kneel on raw peas because she spilled cider on the altar cloth. Historians still debate whether these forms of penance were meant as genuine spiritual purification or merely ritualized discomfort. You suspect it's both. The barley isn't torture, it's grounding. You remember where you are, who you are, what you promised. But it still stings a little. You shift slightly. The moon above you has risen high now, casting long beams across the cloister stones. The air smells like frost and wax and distant pine smoke. You finish your last psalm and rise slowly, brushing the barley grains from your habit. You whisper a soft good night to Saint Benedict. He doesn't reply, but you didn't expect him to. Back in your cell, you curl into your straw mattress and pull the blanket tight. Sleep is close now. It brushes against the edge of your mind like wool against skin. But just as your eyes begin to close, you hear the softest sound, scratching. Under your bed, you freeze. There it is again. You sit up, grab your candle stub, and peer under the wooden frame. Two yellow eyes blink back at you. It's the cat, specifically Sister Joan's cat, the grey one, with one ear that looks permanently annoyed. No one knows where she came from, only that she arrived one stormy night last winter and never left. She answers to no name, appears during meals uninvited, and has a talent for locating the warmest spot in any room. Tonight, apparently, that spot is beneath your bed. You sigh. You're not supposed to be in here? She yawns. You roll your eyes and lie back down. She stays. You don't bother kicking her out. Technically, animals aren't permitted in the cells. But technically, you're also supposed to get 8 hours of sleep. And no one's managed that since Advent. You drift off to the soft sound of purring, the barley grains still clinging faintly to your knees. Outside, the snow continues to fall. You wake to the quiet sound of snow sliding off the convent roof, thick, muffled, soft. The cat is gone. Of course she is. Like all mysterious visitors, she comes and goes without asking permission, leaving only a faint paw print in the straw at the foot of your bed. It's still dark outside, but the bell will ring soon. You sit up slowly, rubbing the sleep from your eyes and feeling every barley grain memory in your knees. You pull on your habit, stretch your arms, and prepare to face another day full of psalms, porridge, and potentially more root vegetables than one's soul should rightfully consume. You file into the chapel with the others for matins. The torchlight wavers as if reluctant to be awake, and the chant is particularly slow this morning. Sister Gertrude drags her vowels like a sleepy cow stuck in mud. No one says anything. After the service, you head toward the kitchen where Sister Euphemia is already elbow deep in a barrel of onions, eyes watering and muttering what may or may not be actual Latin. You're on chopping duty today, again, but that's fine. You've made peace with onions. They may sting your eyes, but they don't talk back. Halfway through your second onion, you hear a small thud behind you. Turning, you see Sister Cecily standing frozen, holding an open scroll in her hands, her mouth slightly ajar. "You'll never believe this," she whispers. You put down your knife. The scroll is a letter sealed with red wax and bearing the sigil of the local bishop. He's planning a visit in 2 days. You and Sister Euphemia exchange glances. This means one thing: total panic disguised as holy preparation. The entire convent shifts into high gear. The chapel must be polished, the guest halls swept, every pot scrubbed until it reflects your sins back at you. The prioress starts assigning tasks with the enthusiasm of a general preparing for battle. You're handed a brush and told to clean the choir stalls until they shine like a martyr's soul. You scrub with vigor. The wood is dry, cracked in places, but still warm to the touch after years of use. Your hands ache, but you work in silence, listening to the distant sounds of other sisters bustling through corridors, moving chairs, whispering prayers of panic. Historians still argue whether such visitations from bishops were a blessing or a bureaucratic invasion. Often, both. The bishop arrives with expectations, order, cleanliness, maybe a miracle or two if possible. You once heard a story about a nun who staged a spontaneous healing during a visit. Turns out the patient had only fainted. No one corrected the bishop. By noon, the convent is glowing. You've never seen it so spotless. Even St. Apollonia's statue has been dusted, and someone placed a crown of dried violets on her head. It doesn't help her expression. You retreat to the cloister walk for a moment of stillness. The snow has finally stopped, and the sun peeks between the clouds, casting long shadows over the garden paths. You pass Sister Blanche, who is muttering psalms while trying to rethread a tapestry needle. She's working on a decorative panel meant to hang in the bishop's chamber. So far, it looks like a sheep, or possibly a lumpy angel. In the warming room, Sister Clarice is composing a chant for the occasion, something original, ambitious. 7 verses, she announces proudly, with rhyming Latin. You wish her luck. Meanwhile, you've been asked to write a welcome speech. You stare at the blank parchment in front of you for a long time. What does one say to a bishop who wears gold-threaded robes and speaks like thunder wrapped in incense? You try a few lines, cross them out, start again. Eventually, you settle on something safe. References to Saint Benedict, humility, obedience, and the fragrance of holy devotion rising from our walls like incense. Not bad. Possibly a bit dramatic. But you're trying to impress a man who once compared prayer to a siege weapon. With the speech written and rehearsed, quietly, under your breath in the garden, you return to evening duties. But as you pass by the dormitory hallway, you hear a faint giggle. You pause. There it is again. You tiptoe closer and peer around the corner. There, beneath the narrow window, you spot Sister Joan, Sister Cecily, and the widow, sitting cross-legged on the floor like schoolgirls, passing a small book between them and stifling their laughter behind their sleeves. You clear your throat softly. They look up, startled. The widow stands, smoothing her gown with practiced dignity. It's only a collection of humorous visions, she says, far too innocently. You raise an eyebrow. Humorous? Sister Joan grins. It involves St. Bartholomew and an unfortunate goat. You shake your head, smiling despite yourself. If the prioress catches you, we'll blame the cat, says Cecily. You let it go. These small rebellions are harmless, even necessary. A little laughter in the shadow of hierarchy is its own kind of prayer. Back in the kitchen, you help prepare supper. It's simple tonight. Vegetable stew, black bread, and a special treat, dried figs soaked in honey. You savour yours slowly, one sticky bite at a time, the sweetness melting on your tongue like a hymn with no words. Later, you sit in your cell reading a borrowed psalter by candlelight. Your eyes blur. The Latin shifts in and out of focus. You close the book and set it aside, wrapping the blanket tight around your shoulders. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft, endless, forgiving. You curl into the quiet and whisper a short prayer. One for strength, one for rest, and one, quietly, for the bishop to cancel his visit, just in case. The bishop does not cancel. In fact, he arrives early. You are still brushing flour from your apron when the lookout bell rings, 3 short peals that signal visitor at the gate. You run, walk quickly, but with purpose. Running is unseemly. To the entrance, heart pounding like you've just stolen something sacred. There he stands, Bishop Aldhelm, cloak lined with white fur, boots too clean for the road, and a ring so large it looks like it should have its own feast day. He blesses you with a lazy sign of the cross and asks if there will be dried pears at supper. You smile and say yes, although there are currently no pears anywhere in the entire convent. Someone will fix that, probably Sister Euphemia, or possibly divine intervention. You help carry his bags, less a sign of humility than a preventative measure, since one is already starting to tear, and escort him to the guest hall. The prioress greets him with a practiced bow and a carefully balanced speech about the honour of visitation. and our humble obedience. You resist the urge to mouth along. You wrote half of it. The bishop says something vague about the quality of the snow and proceeds to inspect the chapel. He tuts at the warped choir stool which you scrubbed until your wrists gave out, praises the stained glass windows, and calls the incense a bit spicy. You nod politely. The sisters line up for introductions. Sister Maud forgets to curtsy. Sister Blanche curtsies too deeply and nearly topples into a torch. Sister Joan sneezes at the exact moment the bishop blesses her, causing him to flinch and wipe his sleeve discreetly. Historians would be thrilled to witness this scene. They often speculate on the dynamics between bishops and female monastics, but they never quite capture this awkward ballet of power, protocol, and barely concealed chaos. The bishop retires to his chamber after supper. No pears, but the prioress bribed him with pickled walnuts and a poem from Sister Clarice. You help extinguish the chapel candles and sweep up crumbs from the refectory floor. It's late. The snow has resumed its quiet descent, blanketing the cloister in a hush so deep it feels like a benediction. You return to your cell. The cat is there. She has taken your pillow. You do not fight her. Instead, you fold your blanket in half and curl on the far side of the straw mattress, head resting on a folded veil. The air smells of wax, wood smoke, and something faintly herbal, lavender, maybe. You close your eyes, and in that moment, with the wind whispering under the eaves and the chapel silent for once, your thoughts begin to float, soft, slow, carried like a psalm on the tongue of sleep. You see Sister Blanche's lopsided tapestry, the one where St. Wulfhilda looks like a surprised goat. You hear the steady rhythm of spinning wheels, the drone of beeswax candles burning low, the scrape of ink across vellum. You remember the sound of barley grains falling from your knees. You feel the warmth of the kitchen fire, the weight of your habit, the quiet pride of a psalm copied perfectly. No blots, no smears, just a line of faith in ink and breath. And then you dream of cloisters and cats, of Latin you suddenly understand, of a bowl of soup that never empties, of silence, not lonely but whole. And now, dear listener, you begin to drift with her, our nun, our sister of rhythm and snow and prayer. Let your breath slow gently. No need to follow the Latin anymore, just the soft cadence of her day echoing in your mind like the quiet sound of a turning page or footsteps in the cloister at dusk. Imagine the feel of cold stone under wool-wrapped knees and the faint warmth of candlelight flickering across old wooden beams. You are safe here. No bells will wake you now. The chores are done. The psalms have all been sung. Even the bishop is snoring. Let the sounds of the convent soften into silence. No whisper of duty, no call to rise, only the hush of snow falling beyond thick walls, the rustle of a cat settling at your feet, the scent of dried lavender tucked beneath your pillow. Your thoughts slow, your muscles ease. You are part of the rhythm now, this ancient pattern of rest and breath and stillness. There is peace in repetition, in gentle devotion, in folding linens and lighting lamps and singing the same words every night. You don't need to remember the rules. You don't need to finish the story. You are already inside it. So breathe, sink into the quiet, and let the convent carry you. One prayer at a time, one candle at a time, until sleep finds you and holds you close.